Hello, and welcome to our last Hope College Connection Live event for the semester, for the spring semester. And we're so excited that you're here. Today, our topic will be tools for tackling microaggressions in the workforce. How you can participate. Tonight, we really are excited to have our last virtual event. Our team is definitely looking for a day when these will be back in person. But tonight we can use this innovative and you really use this tool for Hope Connection Live and also our Hope Connection Live events to connect with our students, alumni, and families. Specifically, Hope College Connection is an innovative online community that brings together students, alumni, and families for networking, mentoring, and learning. If you're looking for a virtual way to support current students or fellow graduates, or simply want to track down an old classmate, this is definitely the platform for you. Visit connection.hope.edu to activate your profile and make the most of your membership in the Hope community. For tonight specifically, we ask that you use the chat, the Q&A box specifically if you have any questions for our panelists. But definitely feel free to use the chat box yourselves to share any insights, stories, or questions that you may have for your fellow participants and alumni and guests of this event. We plan to collect all responses and send this information out along with the recording to any attendees who registered tonight, along with our Microaggressions Toolkit, which we'll touch on a little bit later. Also, I'll introduce myself. My name is Kamara Sudbury. I'm one of the newest members of the Alumni and Family Engagement team, specifically as the Engagement Officer for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion here at Hope College. And we have a really great guest, a panelist. First being Jesus Romero, a 2016 graduate who currently serves at Amazon in talent acquisition. We also have Marissa Solorzano, who is a clinical research coordinator at Michigan Medicine. We also have Samantha Poon, a 2014 graduate of Hope, who is attorney advisor at the U.S. Department of Justice. And last, but certainly not least, Courtney E. Brewster, who is a 2004 graduate and currently serves as director of the college prep program at Washington University in St. Louis. We're fortunate to have you all here as members of the Hope community. Before we get into this fun discussion for tonight, and trust me, you guys are really in for a great conversation, but we first wanted to take this moment to really uplift the work that's done before us, in which we stand on such high shoulders in this work whenever we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. And I would be amiss to not recognize, especially Vanessa Green, who left behind such an incredible resource, which is the Microaggressions Toolkit. But she did not do this alone. So we also want to celebrate and highlight Javon Willis, Margot Walters, Michael Denoto, and the Grow Council, who also spoke to this toolkit that we now get to use to continue this conversation and continue this work. This can also be found on the Center for Inclusion and Center for Diversity and Inclusion's page on our website. And you can also find it on the Alumni of Color Advisory Council's website page on Hope College as well. The purpose of this toolkit was to be a resource for any educators, leaders of diversity, equity, inclusion work, allies, and anything in between, to really form a greater understanding of what microaggressions are, the impact of them, and how to really navigate and strategies for managing them. And this toolkit is inclusive of articles, videos, strategies, and a myriad of resources that are able to provide a better understanding for the impact of how this term or this toolkit phrases it is the oppressor on the oppressed. One thing that I think is important for us to start off before really having this conversation, and it's covered in the toolkit, is the definition. Words are so important. And so we need to be speaking the same language. And in short, microaggressions are everyday verbal, nonverbal, environmental slights, snubs, insults, derogatory statements that intimidates or regulates marginalized groups to inferior or historically inferior status and treatment. This term was coined by our awareness in 1970 by the Harvard psychiatrist Chester Pierce, who coined the term as to describe racially charged subtle blows. But I think it's important to say that language has evolved, and I have personally in my own walk have also seen the term microaggression utilized to describe maybe homophobic, sexist, or even at times classist comments. So it's important to know that this term is not isolated, it is evolving, and there's different ways it's been utilized to describe a shared experience. And even diving into the term deeper, it's been described in 3 pretty consistent ways of micro assaults, micro insults, and micro invalidations. It's important to say that micro doesn't mean they're small. It just means that they're happening on a smaller scale, and that these are sometimes more one-on-one instances. And when we're talking about micro assaults, I think that's like sounding the alarms. So probably the most obvious forms of discrimination, derogatory comments. Probably the obvious ones that come to mind. Micro insults, a little more, can be verbal, nonverbal, subtle, rude comments that might be harder to put your finger on. I think one great example of that is "you speak really well." It's a slight dig that might seem like a okay comment, but there's a lot of deeper meanings and historical context to be to really recognize. Last but not least, micro invalidations. Those are communicate, subtle, exclude, or negate, or nullify feelings or experiences of people of color. And I think one quick example is if maybe a peer goes to someone they perceive to be an ally to say, "Hey, I can't believe this just happened to me," and is looking for that support. And that person might respond, "Did they really say that?" Or "They didn't really mean it like that, did they?" I think those are pretty common micro invalidations. So again, just recognizing that there's levels to this, and that the term microaggression might not always send the same meaning when you say it to different people. And a part of that conversation we really know is growing. And since we have such a great group of alumni gathered here, wish it could be in person, but even in a virtual way we can share from each other, is we want to hear from you. So if you can please take out your on your desktop, or if you take out your phone, visit www.menti.com. Use the code 47433696. They to answer a response, and the question we have prompted is synonyms for microaggressions. And we don't want you to actually write in microaggressions, but think of other ways or terms or words or phrases that you use to describe microaggressions. Again, language is important and constantly evolving. And we know that the term microaggression is not the only way people have described these experiences. So for our educators, how might kids describe microaggressions? Or even thinking about our elders, how might they describe microaggressions? What might they be telling us? Or how have you described microaggressions in the past before you heard the term? Ones that come to mind for me personally is feeling silenced or excluded. Those are terms that I've heard throughout my walk that typically point to a microaggression is taking place. But please, don't allow me to be the only one. Visit www.menti.com, use the code 47433696, and let us know what you think. We hope to collect all these responses, add them within our presentation, and share that within our student body. We really want to continue this conversation and keep growing it. You can also see those links are available in the chat. Before the end of this presentation, we'll revisit our word cloud and see what we come up with. So last but not least, as we mentioned about the toolkit doesn't describe microaggressions, but it tries to provide tools on how to handle them. And one great framework that we could look to is the GARDE Framework, which says, essentially is an acronym that says, gauge the situation, analyze the intent and impact, respond critically and clearly, defend your humanity, and eliminate the source of pain. I think it's always important to note that frameworks are easier said than done sometimes, but this is really a tool to help you, I think, pause and think through your next steps. And I think when we slow ourselves down is when we're at our best to manage any bias, to advocate for ourselves, and really move in a direction that we feel the most comfortable. So anything in between, taking a breath and really thinking through maybe the situation, the impact, and then how you're going to respond. So now that we know a little bit more about that toolkit, let's see how it's playing in our real life and how it manifests itself in the real world. So I'm going to turn this over and stop sharing my screen, and then we can get our panelists going. So get a quick thumbs up if my panelists are able to hear me. Doing good? Awesome. So we're just going to quickly go through with all of our panelists. I think the one that I'm able to see right now is Courtney. But for each of our panelists, please tell me a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why conversations related to inclusion, respect, equity, and belonging are important to you. In short, a little bit about yourself, what are you up to, and why is this conversation important? Jesus, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, let's go ahead and do that. So hi, everybody. You guys can hear me, right? Okay, good. So as she said, my name's Jesus Romero, class of 2016, born and raised in Los Angeles, California. Made it to Hope and recently moved back to Los Angeles. But it was actually my time at Hope that really brought forth my passion in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I just remember getting to Hope and thinking, because I was Latino, that I was a minority. I knew what that meant, but it wasn't until I was on campus that I truly understood what it meant to be in a marginalized group. So through that time, I did a lot of learning at Hope and just truly became passionate through programs like the Phelps Scholars Program, CDI, formerly, Office of Multicultural Education, getting very, very involved there. So I studied business, and that passion for diversity and inclusion drove me towards human resources. So I actually started my career with an internship at Herman Miller with the diversity and inclusion team, and realized there I needed a field in HR to become like a subject matter expert. So kind of naturally fell into talent acquisition. And, within talent acquisition, I saw that it's such a great opportunity to really focus on the diversity part of DEI. And that's kind of what I've been doing the last few years is how do we ensure that we're reaching out to those groups that aren't reached out to enough, being intentional about those initiatives. So along my journey, it's been getting creative with how do we bring folks in these marginalized groups into corporate spaces? How do we make sure that these spaces are prepared to uplift and protect these folks that we're trying to bring in? And along that just come with, for me, learning how to influence the people that are making these hiring managers and making sure that they're, being fair in how they do that. I now work for Amazon, and I actually support Latin America, specifically Mexico and Brazil. So diversity for me has really changed the last few months. Out there it is, they're very focused on gender at the moment in these engineering spaces, but still the same principles and strategies apply there.
That's awesome, Jesus. Thank you for sharing, especially the awesome work that you're able now on a global scale, not just within our context. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I know I just kind of, I messed you up there last time, Courtney, so I'll turn it over to you, please. Let us know what you've been up to, Courtney.
Hey, I was ready whenever you were ready to call upon me. So good evening, everyone. My name is Courtney Elaine Brewster, 04 grad from Hope College, and my career is in higher education and student affairs. And so currently I'm the director of the college preparatory program at Washington University in St. Louis. And my background comes from having student affairs positions within housing, residential life, also doing social justice education and training. And then now with my current job, looking at the field of college access, retention, and then also equity, which is very, very important. When I think about my time at Hope College and coming in as a Phelps Scholar, if it wasn't for the Phelps Scholar program and Uncle Chuck and Millie and Mama Glenda, and then also Vanessa when she came in towards the end of my time at Hope, the thing that really set me on this path is when we read Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria by Beverly Tatum. And that hit me in a space because someone put into words what my experiences were. And it was very, very impactful to the point, even when I had different experiences at Hope, I said, you know what? I really want to support people on their path to college. I said that as a first year student. And so although I myself am not a first generation student, both of my parents attended college. When they attended college and the type of school that they went to, a historically Black college and university, back home, because I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee, was totally different from a predominantly white institution, liberal arts, in Western Michigan. And so it's very important when I think about, as you talk about like equity and being in spaces, there are sometimes where there is a thought that we all should just belong. But the truth of the matter is it is not inclusive. And there are barriers that are set up, whether they are concrete barriers or even if they're things that you cannot see, we all cannot move in every single space, even though we have a right to. And so that's one of the reasons why topics such as this are very important to me, and respect is also very important. Everybody should be able to have it, and it is not given to everyone, depending on what parts of their identities are and how they show up in different spaces. So excited to be here for this conversation, to be also with my fellow panelists. So thank you again.
Thank you, Courtney. So many great gems in that, especially thinking about how that string starts even your freshman year early on, and how even from where your parents come from, how that shapes and moves you, and how sometimes they can't prepare you for what they haven't gone through. So I felt there were so many gems even in that intro. Really excited for this discussion if you all can't tell in the attendees. All right, so we'll keep moving. Marissa, do you mind sharing a little bit what you're up to? You're one of our newest graduates. So what have you been up to since 2019, and why is this conversation so important to you?
Hi, everyone. My name is Marissa Solorsino. I am a recent grad from 2019. I have been working at Michigan Medicine doing research, and just like everyone has spoke about, I got involved in research actually my freshman year alongside all the other things like Phelps Scholars and being a part of many campus activities. So at Hope, I did wet lab research, but now I'm doing more clinical research, meaning that before COVID, was able to sit down and consent patients to studies. But now all of that is virtual. So I call patients over the phone and do consenting that way. And why is this conversation important to me? Just like Jesus, I think you said it, Hope was where you truly understood what all of these things you've been hearing about growing up meant. So what was racism? What I learned microaggression at Hope. I learned imposter syndrome at Hope, all those terms and everything clicking. So I'm actually from Holland. I grew up in Holland. So when I went to Hope, I expected my experience to be very similar to what I had experienced in a more diverse public high school. That was not the case for me. I had that diagram Cam showed with the different layers of microaggressions, I mean, every single one of those I experienced at Hope. I'm not going to go into more than that because we're not going to relive trauma today. But yeah, so I can just say that Hope definitely showed me what that meant, but I'm grateful for that because now in a workspace and for the rest of my life, I want to continue to engage in these conversations and amplify voices that often are silenced. So.
Thank you for that, Marissa. I think a lot of us were snapping and nodding our heads with that comment. And it's very true. I know the title of this is Managing Microaggressions in the Workplace, but you could be at the gas station or you can be walking out of chapel. It can happen anywhere. So I think it's important we're focusing in on the workplace, but it's important to know that that doesn't stop human experience. So I appreciate that. And so last but certainly not least, I want to turn it over to Samantha. Let us know what you've been up to and why is this conversation, especially around inclusion, respect, equity, and belonging, why is it so important to you?
Thanks, Cam. I really just echo what everyone has said, all these amazing panelists, and how I feel like I was really exposed to racism at Hope. So I grew up in China, kind of like I spent my formative years in China, and like, you know, racism exists, but you get to Hope and you're like, oh, wow, like this is what it means to be in a predominantly white space. And I feel like Courtney, like the Phelps Scholars Program, like saved me, you know, like there's these people who are like-minded, who care about me, who care about my experiences, when so much of my other experiences felt like other. Like you were an other either because you didn't grow up in the US or you're other because you look different. And I think that is really what propelled me to be passionate about advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in other spaces, because no one should ever feel like other because of what they look like or how they identify. And because I felt that so intently at Hope, as I think do many people, like I find that I want to take that in every sphere I'm in. And so I'm an attorney, and as everyone probably knows, it's a very white male dominated space. And you especially see it, even though the field is becoming more diverse, you really see it in positions of power. And once you kind of are beyond like the first like level, like line attorneys. And so that's something to me that's I'm very passionate about, is seeing an increase in diversity, and also for myself, like inserting myself in spaces where I don't see people who look like me, and like what does that mean for my career, and what does that mean for like me being in certain spaces that are more white male dominated or white dominated. So since college, I took a gap year in DC, great city, and then went to law school in North Carolina, Wake Forest, and now I work in Chicago for the Department of Justice. I answered the questions out of order, but there you are.
There's no rules here, and I think you touched on something that I think Jesus may have even made a point about, is really when we're pushing for change within these fields that have historically been some ways. I think that's why it's important to even use the word historical, because it doesn't always have to be that way. And I think that you're really, all of us in our own ways, and definitely you are pushing for that because it can change, that it should change. So I really appreciate those comments too, and where that energy is being directed. So now that we get to know each other a little bit more, let's get into the discussion with microaggressions. So I'll in the order that we've already established, I'll turn it over to Jesus. How would you say that microaggressions show up in your workplace, either where you're at now or as you have left Hope and transitioned a few different places?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And one of the things that I've noticed, like throughout my time with the work in DEI, is that, you know, we're really, really quick to focus on race, which is super important. But since going into supporting Latin America, it's different. So now I've really been focused on gender and different abilities, right? And so that's been eye-opening to me, because although that was a portion of the kind of work and diversity that I supported, I did always find myself spending most of my time on, kind of the race portion of it. So I think that the rest of the panel will probably have some great examples on that. So I do want to focus on the different abilities and gender side of it. So where I recruit in Latin America, it's for newly launched buildings with fulfillment centers, delivery stations, and it's very much an industrial engineering environment. So very male dominated. So we have to be really intentional about finding women in these spaces. And so sometimes these microaggressions, basically the messages that they're conveying are that, a mother might not be able to support a 24/7 operation, or, just comments or sort of ideas that kind of come out of that, right? So sometimes I see it in that form that, this may be too industrial, and just being able to kind of, like I said, when they're said in a way that it's a microaggression, folks sometimes struggle to, really explain themselves. And so this is an extreme example. I don't have any managers that are anything like that. It's just, kind of where you can see maybe someone's starting to go, but I'm trained to the point where, we'll stop before we even get there. Same thing with different abilities. We might approach it in what might make sense to us, like, oh, do we have to find a job that would be suitable for someone? And when in reality, that's not for us to decide. Somebody with a different ability can do, whatever. That's not for us in that decision to make. So a lot of that just comes with educating. So again, thankfully there's no intense, examples of microaggression there, but what I'm able to do is that preventative work and lay out the groundwork to make sure that we don't have those difficult conversations. And I'll just kind of pause there about where my focus is lately within talent acquisition.
Thank you, Jesus. I think that's super important, especially the expanding conversation of different abilities. Definitely gender expectations. I know of plenty of women who can manage their way around in a warehouse, among other things. So I appreciate your advocacy there. Is there anyone else who would like to share how microaggressions, maybe Courtney in higher ed or others that they just want to touch on that we can glean some information from?
Thinking about the generational differences that can occur when you're in the workplace, when you show up for a meeting, what is expected of you, who's expected to be around the table, who's allowed to be around the table. Sometimes you do not look a certain age. I'm one of those people who don't look a certain age, even though I am a little bit older. And so, which I appreciate the fact that they feel that I am younger. But what they are stating is because I'm younger, I don't have experience, I don't have wisdom for that. Thank you for once I get older, I'll still look younger. I appreciate that. That's positive. Yet you are not validating and you're denouncing what I bring to the table. The other piece about that kind of generational differences is terms change. How we operated then is not how we operate now. When I think about the use of pronouns or preferred names and how people refuse to call a person what their preferred name is, or don't want to share pronouns. And at the same time, I also am one of those people who I believe it is open for you to share your pronouns if you would like, but I am not one of the persons who forces people to say pronouns, because you can also be in a space where you're forcing someone to share pronouns where they're not comfortable with doing that. And so I can see it as a space where people are trying to be inclusive, but it's still somebody's choice to share that information if they would like to. The other piece is when I think about the intersections of identity. And so whether you walk into a space and there are things that people can physically see about you, opposed to things that they then have to learn about you. And so how many persons of color are in the room? Are there some gender balances? Do we also even have class differences within that space. So are the persons who are talking coming from spaces where they've had extreme wealth, where they've been able to navigate through systems due to said extreme wealth, due to parts of their identity, versus to, are we having persons who have had to break down different barriers and to move through, and if they had to have allies to help them be into different spaces. And so when we look at higher ed, when you think about the persons who are leading in those spaces, and then also the people who are trying to get into those spaces, I think it's important to bring up.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially the intersectionality that's just starting to become something that we talk about more, of understanding that we all check many different boxes. Our identity is not one thing. And really having that wide lens, I appreciate that, really calling that out. And as we've been talking about microaggressions, just really trying to describe it when you're trying to manage it, sometimes it's hard to form a language like I'm doing right now. And so one of the questions that we thought is, how would you describe the term microaggression or the experience to someone who's maybe never heard of it before, or maybe just doesn't understand how it's manifesting itself in the workplace or maybe outside of the workplace? Just curious if anybody wants to touch on that. Samantha, do you have anything? Have you ever had an instance where you kind of touched on that a little bit earlier? But how would you describe to someone who may be just like, I have never heard that before?
Yeah, I think it's different for different people also, right? It manifests in different ways in different settings. And I think it's these like really small slights, at least for me, you can't like really put a finger on, especially initially, like why it's making you feel a certain way. And kind of to go back to the first question, where I really see it in the workplace is specifically white men doing things to make you doubt yourself when there's no, like you shouldn't be doubting yourself, right? Like you are a confident, like, you know, Asian, Black, Latina, Latino, whatever, young attorney, and you should not be doubting yourself. You are smart, you're hardworking. But then someone comes along and specifically in this case, someone came along to me when I was very new in my career, and they asked, like, he asked, why would you do something? Like, why would you say it like this? And gave me this pushback. But I didn't really know where it came from. And I also know now he would not do that to another white male. And just kind of like undermining my confidence in myself. And just the other week, he did it to one of our brand new attorneys who is a Latina. And like, why would you ask her some question that makes her doubt herself when you have nothing constructive to add? And I think that intentional or not, you know, someone like that is an easy target. And like, maybe it's not malicious, right? And oftentimes microaggressions are not malicious, but they still, like, there's these little small things that make you start doubting yourself. And as Marissa was talking about imposter syndrome, like that's really how it presents itself for a lot of minorities and workplaces who don't see people like them. And then where they're treated differently in very small, almost imperceivable ways that make you question that whether that's even real. Like, am I crazy for thinking that he targeted me because I'm Asian and a woman? And so that's both how it manifests itself and also how I would describe I've experienced it in the workplace.
Thank you. That was really, I think, a really great way to bring that in, because I think there's a lot of levels to it. Culture and dynamics of the area kind of change it. Like the first part of you said, it's hard to put your finger on. I know one thing coming from, even I'm a Michigan native, but moving from the east side to the west side was a culture shift that I didn't anticipate. That West Michigan nice or Midwest nice, I've heard it even expand itself. It's very hard to put your finger on until someone really describes it to you. And once you have that description, then you have that information to be able to move forward. I hope in some of those cases where you saw a peer maybe running into the same systemic issues, you were able to be a peer and support to each other, or reach out and say, no, that's not right. You got it, which is what we tend to have to be for each other. So now I kind of want to dive into that thought a little bit further. Bringing back the GARDE framework that we touched on earlier, it recommends analyzing the intent and the impact of a microaggression. How do these terms differ, or maybe even unpacking a situation where you were able to weigh where you had to actually do this, where you had to figure out what the intent was and what the impact to you was, and how do they differ and how they matter? Marissa, is there something that you can think to in your experience that you had to really think about the intent versus the impact, or vice versa?
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot over here. There's been so many multiple things where I'm like, yes. And I'm going to touch, I guess, on two of them. One, Courtney was talking about people using pronouns, and then Samantha was talking about slipping and how it might not be an intentional thing. And so I actually slipped once, and I used the pronoun he, him when I was referring to a doctor, because I work with physicians, and I'm going to be a future med student. So that's my area outside of research. I also realized I didn't say that earlier. So I'm like medical field. And so when I was talking about a doctor, I don't even remember the following name, there's no pronoun associated with it. And I used the pronouns he, him, which was a microaggression that I did. So when we're talking about, and that's like falling into the sexism, just stereotypicalness of physicians. And I'm someone going to be a future physician, and I still used that. So this was honestly like the one time in my life where I did this, and it still haunts me in my sleep. So I think something about microaggressions that like a thing to really put your finger on is falling into societal norms and not challenging those norms, and how we talked about historic, using that term when we're talking about marginalized groups, that is a historically marginalized group, in whether that be in the medical field, physicians, lawyers, whichever. So I do think that all of this is like super a part of being human and growing. And so then that's one part in my own life where I messed up. I knew the intention was not malicious, and I immediately addressed it. Actually, I said it, and before the person responded, I said, I'm really sorry I used those pronouns. That's my own mess up. And then someone once, this is another gender thing. I don't know why my brain is going gender today instead of race. Like I'm normally always talking about more racially focused microaggressions, but a man who had a higher, power than I do at work said that I looked nice today. And as a joke, I just simply responded, I look nice every day. And so I do think with microaggressions, I actually like took a small class at work. Either if you feel uncomfortable, you can walk away, talk to a coworker, or even 3, you can use humor and just hit it right at where it is. Because why are you saying today? Why are you even commenting on my wardrobe? Leave me alone. So, and especially with the power dynamic that there is, it is intimidating for people to even comment on your looks at work. I don't think you should. So that's what I've done at the workplace, me, myself messing up, and then others and how I've personally tackled it.
Oh, I think I don't know if I'm the only one who definitely had a flash of something that I'm holding on to times they messed up. And it is so easy to do. It's names, it's experience, assuming where someone's from, assuming their title, assuming anything. We all have bias. We all have our our things that we're working through, and I think no one. I mean, I have diversity, equity, inclusion in my title. That does not exempt me from being corrected, from being, from messing up or not being the best ally or support that I'm supposed to be, or human being. And I think where it comes is offering grace and willingness to be corrected and correct others and stand up for each other. So I just really appreciate you providing that vulnerability, Marissa, because I don't think one person on here would say, I've been perfect since day one. I don't know, always how to to show appreciation and be, perfect. So I really appreciate that comment. So this is something that I'll open up to anyone. What is the best advice or tip you've received for dealing with uncomfortable conversations in the workplace? And even more, is it important or even possible to be professional in these situations? I'll say mine, to document, document, document. Anyone else?
I think something, oh, sorry, Courtney. I have been very, very lucky to have a lot of really amazing mentors who span a lot of different types of diversity. And in many scenarios, specifically in the job I've been in, where I've encountered either microaggressions or really uncomfortable situations, I've turned to my mentors and asked them, like, what should I do? Should I confront this person? Is it worth it? Like, especially my older female workers who've been in the legal field for 30 years, like, what have you done in scenarios where men have made you feel small and they do it intentionally, or they do it repeatedly, maybe not intentionally, maybe intentionally. And I have found that to be invaluable, having that type of advice and having people I can turn to, and one, just vent and for them to understand my frustration, but also to get good advice and valuable advice, having lived some of the experiences I've lived. And so that'd be one of my biggest pieces of advice to myself, is to continue to find good mentors, but for everyone else is to find people who can be in your corner, who can identify with your experiences, and then turn around and help you in figuring out what your role is, and in discerning impact and in discerning intention and what your next steps are. And if there are next steps, if it's even worth it, right? Because sometimes it's not worth it.
When you're talking about things not being worth it, it connects to what are the risks going to be for you. And so there are some spaces where if someone states something, you can turn around and you can disrupt it. And so I'm thinking about from one of our members of AC Squared, our Alumni of Color Advisory Council, she talked about how she is a disruptor. And so being a disruptor can come in many different forms. People move different ways. So I could be the disruptor who immediately turns around and says, no, that's something inappropriate that you stated. I don't appreciate that. I was offended. Or also I can be the disruptor where I stop, pause, breathe, go and touch base with a mentor, right? Also, while I'm doing this, I document this information. And then at the same time, I can sit and I can say, how do I want to move? Who do I need to talk to? And so you might not see, when I think about myself, it depends on the situation. You might not see me respond or act in that moment, but you don't know what I'm doing behind the scenes to make sure that this is addressed, or to touch base. And my supervisor knows this. I don't make moves without my supervisor knowing. And so there might be situations that I encounter and I might deal with them right then and there, but then I pick up the phone and then I call her. Just want to let you know, I was in this meeting and this is what occurred. And this is what I said. So that no one else can tell you what I said. You know what I said. And it can also be a situation where one of our co-chair to AC Squared, Tiffany, always states that you have to play chess and checkers. And so when you think about that, like you have the different moves on the board and whatnot, sometimes that pawn gets blocked and you can't move, but you don't know what that, pawn is doing for stopping something to come your way. Or, when you're getting kinged with something, that's pulling in those different allies, as Samantha's talking about the mentors. And so I think it's important to have those allies, as you spoke about, that have differing identities to you. Someone who can connect with you, or maybe come from a different perspective than you. I think it's very, very important for when you move, because everybody does not act or react in the same way. And I think that's really important to note.
I can just jump right in, Courtney. I love that advice. I like that the other important part about our talk today is what is what's a model, or what are strategies that people can take forward to work on this, right? So I loved how you talked about how you pivot as you need, right? Not every situation can be approached the same, and all of you as individuals aren't going to have the same comfort or to approach all situations the same way. So I think that's super important. And Courtney also had this theme running along too, and Samantha too, is also protect your energy. I know that sometimes as people of color or being a part of any marginalized group, if you're the only one in that space, you might feel like you aren't doing justice if you don't speak up every time, right? But it's not worth it. Like Courtney said, what's the risk? And even if it may be low risk, is it worth your energy? Is there a constructive ending? And I think it's okay if you're not the super person of your group every single time. And some may disagree with that, but I've just learned through my career that it would probably have been more exhausting if for every little incident that came up, I reacted right away and said something, right? What I've really learned or felt has helped me through my career is just really tapping into my empathy, which I connect back to that intent versus impact thing, right? Like, of course, whoever's saying or doing should worry about how it's going to impact me, but I do always look at the intent. And if I can pull some things together and see, well, what was the intent? Or if I can address and ask them, then that's good, right? And I have one great example, which I still think about all the time. Should I have said something? Should I have addressed it? But it was at another job, and I had just been nominated for an award, and there was a big event, a gala to show up to, and I was sharing it with someone that had been at the company for a long time, and I mentioned to her, hey, I'm going to this awards thing, and she said, oh, that's awesome. Do you own a suit? And that was one of those where I just, I don't know how to take that. And that's the way I define microaggressions to people, is when you hear something and you just kind of ask, like, did she just insult me, or did she just question my class? And so prior to that, she was just the sweetest person to me, had taught me a lot. And again, just kind of like, I didn't like how I felt after that. And unfortunately, I didn't address it in the moment. I did talk to a lot of other folks and asked, like, was that like wrong of her to ask me that or say that? Like, would she had asked that to anybody that said they were going to a nice event? And again, I just start to think back, like, well, what does she know about me? What have I shared from her? I did tell her I grew up in the hood in LA, but still, that doesn't give her, the right to do that or say that. So that's just a good example of maybe me today, who has evolved and learned more confidence, would have maybe asked her a couple of questions, like, oh, I actually own a couple. Why do you ask? But yeah, all that to say, protect, your energy. Everyone kind of said the same thing. Ask a mentor, even just a coworker. I've had emails come through that I read it, and that's the hard thing too about how the workplace has changed. Is now we're on these calls, we're reading emails, and I've had to do that a lot, where I have to share an email with a coworker and say, hey, are they testing me here? So don't be afraid to lean on others, protect your energy, and yeah, pause there.
The only thing I would add to everything that everyone has said, which is so great, is don't also be afraid to still be yourself. I think I had a really strong time not falling into the stereotype of being like a loud Latina, and that's who I am, and I'm not ashamed of it. And so, but also, being professional, but don't lose your identity, and don't be scared that you may be falling into, stereotypes that are put on us. So just still be yourself and take care of yourself. I think that's super important, like Jesus said, and everyone else said, with risks and pros and cons. And those are things that help when you take a step back versus, responding right away, because then you can actually process those pros and cons.
I just wanted to follow up on something Jesus mentioned, and he was talking about asking questions. And I found that to be a really good way to tackle certain microaggressions. So a coworker in a meeting said something about how it was just a pissing contest. And I follow up and I was like, I'm sorry, what do you mean by pissing contest? Do you mind explaining what you mean by that? And forcing him to explain this, I'm using this really sexist terminology where like there are, I mean, it shouldn't matter that there were women present, but there are many types of people present. Like that's not okay language to use, and like pushing him to kind of confront. And he's like, oh, well, you know, and I'm like, no, I don't know. And I have found that's a really good way to combat it in a way that feels a little less confrontational instead of being like, you know, that was a really sexist thing to say. And it's hard because you have to like come in with a mindset of like, this is how I'm going to approach these like issues when they arise. But I personally found that to be a good way in approaching certain microaggressions.
Thank you all for sharing. I think what you all have been able to touch on is that they look very different. Where you show up, what professional may even mean. If you're a UFC fighter, professionalism might look a lot differently than you as a bank teller. So you have to constantly be aware of your dynamic. What is professionally is the mean? Who are your mentors? And what makes sense for you to respond. Back to Courtney's note is you should respond in a way that is comfortable for you. Even your mentor can't necessarily do that for you. So it's important to follow up in the way that you feel honored. And I guess just to add to the conversation, my mother instilled in me the serenity prayer. What can I control? What can I cannot control? And the wisdom to know the difference, I think, is something that's that I lean on personally. And so now we're going to get into the Q&As. We have some really good questions coming into the chat, so we'll try to get through these. The first is coming from Lydia, pronounced she, her. She says, I'm a teacher, and I think it's Minnesota, admin, right? 2010 grad. My district's admin is all white men. Any ideas on how I can help change that? We currently have 2 openings for admin. If you know of someone who is looking for a principal job, I can send them the link. Thanks for hosting and being here tonight. So you have some job descriptions, you have some job postings. Where do you need to send these? How do you get connected? What's the best way to diversify your space? I think if we knew the answer, we would be millionaires, but what ideas do you have around it, Jesus?
Yeah, I was going to say, as a recruiter, I'm like jumping at this one. One, as a recruiter, I appreciate you taking advantage of this space to advertise your job. Good work there. Second, I think what has really helped at past organizations is the want or the desire or the importance and the priority needs to come from leadership. When the person that's in leadership above that role makes it a priority and says, hey, we need to do this, that normally helps set that, kind of that flame and encourage people to do that. Otherwise, it has to be really intentional. Sometimes spending money on search firms that focus on that have to be intentional. So just 2 quick things, get leadership buy-in, and don't think about how quickly you need to fill the job. Sometimes this means it's going to take a little longer to find the right person, and be okay with spending some money on resources to help get this job in front of other groups that might not normally happen. Second, if you're going to go through that much effort to find someone, make sure that you're inviting them to an environment that is ready for them. Because that's one thing that I learned early on too, is the equity and inclusion part is almost more important than the diversity part, right? If we're going to bring all these people through the door, there's got to be an environment ready. Thank you.
Another thing is think about where you're advertising the position. And so there are different organizations that actually are in support, and part of their mission is to advance the experiences of those of different marginalized groups. And so there are a variety of organizations, whether they're connected as it pertains to gender or also race. And so then you can always find, because they typically will have spaces where you can post jobs to send out to those who are connected to those organizations.
Awesome. I already see some comments coming through saying thank you for those answers, Jesus and Courtney. I think this next question would be great for Samantha. It says, hey panel, it's Miles Pruitt, 2019 grad. What's up, Miles? My question is centered on hope. I know Miles, so I'm just give a little shout out. My question is centered on hope specifically. What did you think hope, or how did you think hope prepared you for the corporate world? And what ways do you think hope can improve in diversity and inclusion? Certainly open for the group, but just curious on how this question hits you, Samantha.
I think Jesus mentioned this, or could have been someone else in their introduction, and how like it like really prepared me for the real world. Like it was hard being a minority at Hope. It was really, really hard. And you had to like dig inside yourself to be like, who am I? And like, what are my values when it's different than other people around me and most other people around me. And like walking into white spaces, like it's very similar, right? Like, what is my identity? What do I bring? And like, what type of like self-worth and confidence am I bringing to the table when I'm going to get shut down and I might be the only person in the room that looks like me. And like, in a way, I'm very thankful for Hope for that experience, because it was a hard experience, but a good learning experience that I will always have, for better or worse. And then the second part of the question is, what ways can Hope improve in diversity, equity, inclusion? That's a good one. That's a good many ways. And it's hard to know where to start, because it starts in the staff and the faculty, and they do these people reflect what Hope students look like, and kind of what Jesus was talking about earlier. Like, is Hope even ready for the diversity that it says it wants? Because I don't think it is. And ways that it could be things like the Phelps Scholars Program, getting CDI out there, giving them their own space, giving space for minorities, like not allowing for some of these white supremacist mindsets and like the results that manifest on campus, like cutting it out, not allowing them to happen. And I think right now, Hope very much status quo allows that stuff to happen. And like, as minority students, you see it, and then you see your worth reflected in it. And like, that's really where Hope has to make change. And the Alumni of Color Advisory Council has lots of thoughts on how Hope can do that specifically, but that is probably a long other discussion.
One thing I want to add to that is it was at the beginning part of Samantha's thing, how being a student of color at Hope was very difficult. And then during my senior year, I did senior, I think, seminar is what it's called. And you talked about who you are and yada, yada, yada. And I talked about my experience at Hope. And it was baffling the amount of white students on the other end who had no idea. And so I think that there's a huge disconnect. And I don't know the answer. Like Samantha said, obviously our team's like working on that. Like, that's our whole point of who we are, coming to you this summer. But yeah, I just think like my senior year, I really felt that disconnect between a majority of the white students versus the students of color, and just how their experiences leaving Hope. So when you talk to someone, you know, who is a student of color, they say, oh, my experience at Hope was bittersweet. Like, it helped me so much, but there's always that but statement that comes after. If you ask a white student, I bet you that that but statement doesn't include traumatic racial issues. So, yeah.
I appreciate all these comments. It makes me think of, in my last job, we did this, is similar to a privilege walk, but it was more of a rating where everyone had to go and we had to position ourselves where we thought the company was with diversity, equity, inclusion. And no matter, like, I don't know, you know, who tests this out, but no matter what, the darker your skin color, the more you felt that the company had room for improvement. The lighter your complexion, the more you thought we were doing great. And so they asked the 10s versus the 1s, how you feeling? And it was just the complete opposite. I'm glad that we're doing something, was heard by the 10s. I see we're doing stuff that we weren't doing 5 years ago, or the people who were experiencing a lot of the failed promises or microaggressions in the workplace were saying, yeah, it's not good enough. We're not even getting to the place that we need to go. And I completely agree with both of your points, and especially the disconnect that needs to happen And oftentimes I also feel that we can't suffer in silence. And that's where this is kind of here too, is to share our stories, stand on that, and expect the world to change, honestly. And that's sometimes a radical thought, but it's one that I hold on to dearly, that it can't always be this way. So going back into the chat, we do have some really good questions, so I'll try to keep them, we'll try to maybe spare them off. Mr. Gibbs, or not sorry, Mr. Trevins Gibson said, imposter syndrome, what is it? How do you get rid of it or deal with it? Marissa, do you want to touch on this one since you brought it up earlier?
Sure. Let me think. Oh boy, it's a good question. I mean, the second half I think is harder. I don't know if you can get rid of it. I think you can deal with it. But imposter syndrome is when in general you feel like everything that, I guess a synonym would be like, you feel like a fraud. You feel like all your work that you've done isn't because of your work. And I can give you a great example of this. So I was given a great scholarship to attend Hope College, and I have had many white people look me straight in the eyes and say, that is only because you are not white. No, it's because I'm a hard worker. Thank you very much. I have multiple scholarships to multiple schools, and they're not only because I am not white. And I continue to get scholarships even into medical school. So to toot my own horn. But so it's just this feeling of fraud. And that is, like Samantha was saying, it's tailored, well, right next to microaggressions, because when someone's doubting you and filling you with doubt, the result is that imposter syndrome of, did I do this? Like, am I a hard worker? Like, you almost start questioning your own value. And I don't think you can get rid of it though. I think you can deal with it. I don't know. I'm still dealing with it. I'm young. So I don't know. Courtney, someone else who's a little bit.
And I think about that piece of dealing with it, how Samantha stated at some point, you talked about how you have to look at yourself and you have to be confident. So thinking about experience with me from Hope, my first year roommate, I was in a triple. That year enrollment was very, very high, and they turned doubles into triples in Scott Hall. And from that situation, I remember my roommate coming in, and we had some conversations, and she told me, she was like, you got to Hope due to affirmative action. And I was like, oh, interesting. That's a really, really interesting thing to say, because I had a 3.8 GPA when I graduated from high school. So yeah, that's one of those things. But when I think about it, it goes back to exactly what Sam said. You have to talk to yourself and encourage yourself. And you need cheerleaders, coaches, people on the sideline, somebody who you can just call and say, girl or person, human being, because I'm speaking for myself, girl, for you, person, human being, however you'd like to be called. You are the stuff. Let me tell you about that time when you did this. Did they know about when you did that? And those people actually have come from my experience. And somebody later on talked about the Felt Scholars Program, from my connections that I built from those people, and also allies, because Felt Scholars is not just included of persons of color, right? And so my white allies, one of my friends, just talked to her on the phone yesterday. I remember I came back into the room. She lived across the hall from me, and she said, what did my people do to you today? Because I was so frustrated. It was just a lot of things going on. So to be able to have that conversation with a white woman who understood the things that were in play, not somebody who completely believes they understand everything, who still works through their stuff just like we all do, be able to sit there and talk to you about things. And then also just having that support system of people around you. That's the thing that's going to help you with that. You have to encourage yourself. You have to be like, look, this is the moment, as you said, tooting my own horn. That is the piece. You got to toot your own horn.
That's right. And as you were actually talking about that, the next question asks, could you explain Phelps Scholars for folks who are maybe not familiar with it? And just like in a under 5-minute response, Courtney, how would you describe Phelps Scholars to someone?
Phelps Scholars Program was a program connected to Dr. Charles Green, who I affectionately call Uncle Chuck. And the program was a space where you actually had to write in and apply for it. I believe we had to write an essay kind of talking about our experience, and it was for persons who wanted to live in a community together, where we all took a course. And also the book that I mentioned earlier, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Back of the Cafeteria? We actually read that book. And so through conversations, cultural immersion trips, I remember us traveling to Chicago, going to different churches, and I can't remember what the name of this place was, but we went to this reenactment place where it was dealing with slavery, and I can't remember what it was called, but talk about a space for us all to go in. Tears and just a lot of things going on. And I'm seeing the nods so you all understand what I'm talking about. Was it the Underground Railroad reenactment in Ohio? Was that what we went to? Okay, so that changed a lot of people's lives in that space. And so as Sam, Marissa also touched on that piece of connecting kind of with the Felt Scholars Program, it's really a space for people to come together who are open to have conversations such as this. And it should be something, the tenets that are a part of Felt Scholars Program should not just be in Felt Scholars Program. When I think about things that hope can change, there should be a common reading book. There should be conversations about this with everybody. This should not just be something that is connected to the walls of Scott Hall. This is something that needs to be ingrained within the system. The work that they have done in this program has impacted our lives dramatically, and have set us up for the different spaces in which we find ourselves in now.
Snapping, because that is nothing but facts. So again, we have some more questions coming in. I definitely want to get to them all. This is coming in. Hi, it's Rachel, 20. As a hard of hearing person or graduate of 2000, as a hard of hearing person, how can I be more of a better person with combating any microaggressions? I miss a lot of those side comments about and I want to do my part at being a better person. How can I let people know that I am there to help, even if I don't hear the comment or joke? So wanting to be recognizing that there is some hard of hearing and wanting to still kind of like segue, maybe kind of think of the humor comment that you talked about a little bit earlier, Marissa, but is there any ideas on ways to, I don't think it's, in my personal opinion, about being a better person, but just maybe an easier way to navigate those situations if you have any different ability level.
So I think
I can.
Yep.
Go ahead, Courtney. Go ahead.
No, you go.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, no, I guess one of the things that I want to point out to you, Rachel, is I don't think there's one way to push this work forward and be an ally. So just first off, feel comfortable knowing that there isn't one way to do this, that find the way that's going to work best for you. Maybe it's in your day-to-day one-on-one interactions. Maybe it's something you see an old friend post on, social media that you like to address with them. Like, I think that you can find your way where you're supporting the work and, be okay with that, knowing that there's not a right way to do it. You don't have to be, monitoring people and feeling that that's the only way to do it. So, yeah.
And also one of the other things with microaggressions, they are also nonverbal. So there are things that occur and you are able to see them. And so then you can respond and react in that way. And I also think it connects to the people who you are around. If you have open conversations with them about, if there's something, you can let me know. And then, I can respond to it, because it might not always be something that you hear. And you definitely can encounter it in different ways.
And I definitely think among people who care about you, never hard to ask them to maybe accommodate you. I know I have a friend who, I think she actually took it from her sorority, but before she wanted to talk, she always did this. So maybe that's a signal or something that people can offer you to make sure that they have something to say, or that you have something to say, or, there's different ways that you can adapt. But I definitely I think with microaggressions as well, just like making sure you're not worrying about how other people feel, is about how you honor yourself as well. And you're the person that advocates for yourself. So Here's an anonymous question. I'm currently a young woman in the trades. I'm the only female technician in my organization. As a result, frequently feel othered. My coworkers say blatantly racist, sexist, homophobic, ableist things at least twice a week when in the garage. As the youngest and only female member of the team, how do I address this? Am I even able to be an agent of change from the position I am in? I can only imagine how challenging of an environment that has been. So I just want to honor Anonymous, that my heart is thinking of you, especially what I would label as a toxic work environment. Jesus, do you got any ideas for Anonymous?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I echo what Cam just said about, apologize if that's your day-to-day. So, first off, if your manager is someone that you're comfortable enough with to talk about these things, you should, while also including HR, whoever's the representative. And if between HR and your manager, they're not able to make the change, then I think it's okay to consider a new work environment. Not only are people in trades difficult to find, let alone, you did share with us you're a woman in trades, like let alone a woman in trades, there's tons of great organizations that would, gladly take you in, and we take you in at Amazon. So I would say definitely try those steps there, because I like that you're trying to make it work, but also don't, force yourself to do that if it's within your ability to look elsewhere.
Thank you, Jesus. All right, last but not least, our last question to come through is from Leah. A continual tactic of white supremacy is to pit BIPOC groups against each other. Sorry, to pit Black, Indigenous, people of color groups against each other. What resources or strategies do you have to help dismantle this? I think this is a great question for our alumni of Color Advisory Council leaders. How do we not fall into tactics of white supremacy, especially there among others, but pitting each other against each other, or marginalized groups against each other?
I think it's really hard, because in all of this is hard, right? Because it's so much learned, socialized, and reinforced behavior. And specifically in the Asian community, there is so much anti-Blackness in the Asian community. And in a lot of the AAPI hate crimes, a lot of them have been perpetrated by Black members of the community, right? So that we are just, like, the question is so spot on, like we are pitted against each other, and it is all to the benefit of white supremacy. And for me, a lot of that is like learning the history of the violence against each other, but also like there has been so much collaboration between the Asian community and the Black community in the history of America. So much where they have rallied together and fought together, and you don't know about it. You don't hear about it, and you don't see that we are allies for each other. And we don't see it because that's what white supremacy wants, right? And so I think a big part of it is learning the history. It can't be all, of course, but like really understanding like where are we coming from, and where do we go from the history. Like I recently learned about Grace Lee Boggs. I don't know if anyone's heard of her, but she was like this really amazing activist in Detroit. And she's huge in furthering the civil rights movement and all this activism, but I never heard of her, even though she is an Asian American, she's a Chinese American woman. And I think like learning that type of stuff really empowers us to help each other. And I do want to tie this really quickly back to the microaggression question, where like, what can you do about microaggressions if you are hard of hearing or have another disability? And I think in my experience, a lot of microaggressions are not quiet. You just need to know to identify them, because they are everywhere, all over. And it's like the same like learning thing, learning what microaggressions are, learning what it means to be pitted against each other, and how to unlearn those behaviors that we've learned.
I think I want to add one thing to that. One part of Phelps Scholars, I feel like this is kind of with Phelps Scholars, and like also, I don't know, I'm just feeling this one general thing right now. One thing that Phelps Scholars taught me was I am also grateful that I had that space, because it was a safe space. So when we separate groups, it can be harmful, but at the same time, there is that opportunity to be with individuals who know your experience and can give you almost, it's not exhausting. You're not continuously teaching people because they live your experience. You can't live the same experience as another person. It's just not possible. So I do think having, you know, safe spaces such as 12 Scholars and other things like BSU, all the MSOs at Hope are really important. And I don't think that pitting against each other is different than having organizations that celebrate diversity. So I just want to say that because I feel like that's a big question at Hope I got. Like, do you think that 12 Scholars, you know, should be gone? No, I think that safe spaces should be a place at Hope. So yeah.
Thank you all so much. I think unity is honestly the best strategy when it comes to combating a lot of those things. So I appreciate Samantha's point about knowing your history, because a lot of these stories have been told so many times over and over again, and we can learn from our past and how to overcome these systemic issues. So quickly, I wanted to show the results of our word cloud on microaggressions, something that again will be shared out after this event. But we got some really great responses. The most being ignorance, backhanded compliment, qualified praise, rude, disrespect, compliments that aren't, discrimination, deny, covert, thoughtless, delay, no empathy, ignored, wronged, dismissing, derogatory, subtle racism. These are really heavy topics, and these are not easy things to confront and to really work against. But when you can find peers and support, know that not only us at Hope, but I'm sure there's many people in the workplaces that you frequent, or as you go into the workforce, find those mentors, find those people that you can turn to, because these topics, these things are popping up all the time. So we'll share this out, this word cloud, and feel free to continue to contribute if some other ideas come to mind. And the last thing we want to do just before you leave, the biggest takeaways is to know that microaggressions are not isolated incidents. There's a thread that weaves a lot of these situations together. Targets, bystanders, and allies all have a role to play out in calling out and disarming microaggressions. The best thing you can do is be a support system for someone who is experiencing these challenges, really thinking about some of those stories like Courtney shared. And 3, anyone who experiences or witnesses microaggressions should act and potentially file a report as soon as possible. And be sure to take notes and document your experience. Those situations are hard, and when we are emotional, it's the hardest time to really think. And I think those are the moments where it's good to pause, sometimes write it out, document it, even send yourself a voice memo so you can think, and maybe share and reach out to someone for some support. And know that filing a report and following up the chain is something that sometimes we might be called to do, and know that that's okay, and you can get support along the way. So just want to thank you all again. A round of applause for our amazing panelists for sharing their wisdom with our community. And please be sure to check out Hope Connection Live and also the Alumni of Color Advisory Council's homepage to stay connected and up to date on all things alumni. We are so appreciative to have you and looking forward to, again, when we can be together in person soon. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful night.